So today is a recap episode, and we are going to start with episode one, and we're going to recap exactly where we started, and then we're going to know where we're going to go from there. So I'm going to get that pulled up. Yeah, so we thought we would start with I just brainstormed some premises, and they're very different from comedy, superhero, all different types of stories, and a horror. And that was what kind of got both of us going. So this is where we came up with the premise that in every building there's one door no one ever opens. One day someone does. So that was the premise that kicked off the entire story, and everything we've done up until this point has been based along that premise. So basically, once we decided we were going to go there, we had to sort of start thinking about what that was going to look like.
Yeah, and the reason why I chose the premise of the door is I wanted to have a comic book that had a few characters, not a huge cast. It didn't have a lot of complex ideas, and
Hmm.
so while I was reading the idea and then thinking about what it would look like, I started to visualize what a character may be in the environment of this store, and that's why I started drawing this character gesture. They're sitting on the floor, and the door is very present.
Hmm. And what was really interesting about this is, as you'll see in later recaps, as we start going through them, we change a lot, but a lot of this still remains. A lot of the feel and the look and the character and everything that we came up with in episode one still largely follows us into subsequent episodes. So, this really was our kind of initial brainstorming of what we wanted this to be. So I'm just going to move through this a little bit here and just sort of see how we even Keith got into a little even bit more detail of the character as we went through the episode.
Yeah, so there's nothing wasted. Whenever you're
Mhm.
creating a story, you're doodling ideas out. You may not use the some of the doodles for a particular story you're working on. It may be for another story, but oftentimes you get ideas for the story that you do stick with. And so the character of Sam, and we're going to find out that's their name in subsequent episodes. Sam pretty much looks the same as they did from this first image. That doesn't always happen. Sometimes you have to really keep on working on the character to get the feel for who they are. We didn't even really know like what genre of story. I mean, we kind of got a sense that it was like psychological horror, maybe, but
Mhm.
how much are we leaning into that? I don't know. So the character really, for whatever reason, this was the direction that I felt worked for the story with this character. And I think Sarah, like, what were your thoughts in regards to the look of the character?
Absolutely. I think this was one of the things that once we decided directionally where we wanted to go, we kind of agreed from the get go on what this character would look like, right? As just as Keith started sketching the character, which we later named Sam, it just felt right. It just everything about this was perfect. So it was episode one got us into a lot of space and really helped us define who the character was going to be, which is what brings us into our next episode. So for episode two, we really focused in on character. So we really wanted to figure out who this character was. Now that we had a rough look at them, we I went away and I sort of came up with what I thought Sam would be. We decided that they were going to be intentionally unstated about who they were. They were in their late 20s, early 30s. They would live a solitary life. They, have lost a version of themselves, not just a person. They were troubled, right? We decided that from the very beginning. We didn't know if it was a breakup, a death, a career collapse, something, but we decided that this character was in a bad place when we found them. They had an emotional wound and they like to avoid things, right? This was a character who tried to just pretend things weren't happening, which becomes really important as we get into the story. They're quietly anxious, they're highly observant, they're not dramatic, they internalize their stress, and they what really are affected by the things around them. Okay, so that was sort of what we started to decide was going to be our character. And then the door. The door actually becomes a character in and of itself. So it represents that belief that the hidden answers are just outside. There's loss, there's pain, there's dissatisfaction. The door became this force, and the door morphs into the main character by the time we get to the end of the story. So it's this feeling that once the door is opened, the story ends. And this was really important to decide before we got any further into designing Sam as a person. We needed to know who they were.
And what was really interesting, while you were explaining this again, what's really interesting is a lot of your thoughts about this character came about because of the visuals that I created from
Absolutely.
episode one. And the door and Sam being these characters evoking certain feelings, certain uh, technical aspects of what the story is going to be, that got Sarah to really
Mhm.
expand upon who this character was, which then in turn gave me more ideas to visually put down for this character. And so, if you're coming from this, from the aspect of like, I'm working with somebody and we're going to work back and forth, I'm not going to necessarily have like a script finished. If you have a script, maybe it's just a starting place. It's like a living document,
Mhm.
because what works really well in this situation is that one idea is feeds off of another idea, feeds off of another idea. We kind of bounce ideas back and forth, and that develops the story. So it takes it to a place where it's not really anything that either it was just me or just Sarah. It's
Mhm.
kind of the both of us together. And that's the really fun part about this whole experience so far.
Absolutely. And that collaboration is every episode has had a strong element of that. Even if we've gone separately and done a part and then brought it together, it's always been based on what the other person had suggested. And like Keith mentioned, a lot of what I put down about the character was based on that first piece of art. So that's why in episode two, we could really expand because we had this strong base of both visually as well as description, who this character was and who the door was. The door being its own character in the comic book.
And so, just on the technical aspect of what you're seeing here while I'm drawing this character, I'm trying to figure out the character different poses, mainly from the bust up, just to get a sense of what they're like when they are forward, side, up, down. That's just really me becoming more familiar with the space the character takes up, the shape of their head. Is it in this case? It's like a teardrop shape, so it's a bit pointed at the chin, a bit wider up here. Figuring out like, are they a youngish person and they middle aged person? They have a bit of line in their face. Are they big personality, small personality? These are all things I'm thinking about. And when it comes to the visual element of this, and a lot of that comes from the description I got from Sarah in regards to what they're bringing to this room, this why they're there, why they're present in this place at the particular time. And all of that kind of informs me how I should have this character act out.
And the interesting thing too is we never really described in any direction whether this character was male or female.
No.
We just kind of were, this is Sam. And it's just kind of this character that it doesn't really matter because of the kind of story that we're telling. And the look of the character as we were going through and Keith was illustrating is it was kind of evolving. We were noticing different things. We were starting to talk about the hair as such an important factor, and that's going to come up in subsequent episodes. Okay, let's move into episode 3 here. Okay, so for episode 3, we wanted to talk about the purpose of each page, which is a different step than sometimes we do. But because of how this was evolving, we thought it was important to think about the action through kind of the feelings of each page. So for page 1, that was the arrival and disruption. So the purpose was establish normalcy. We're in an apartment. And then we introduce the wrongness. Something's going on here. I don't know if it's upsetting or not. I need clarification. So that's how we started. And then we went into the avoidance and control. So this was showing that denial through action. So I can't remove it, but I'm going to ignore it. So trying really hard to be that kind of character who's just sort of finding a ways around it. Then into page 3 was obsession and erosion. So this is the shift from control to fixation. And this is the mess, something it has to do something. This means something to me. Then choice and aftermath. So resolution without explanation. So the search for answer ends not with truth, but with absence. So we really wanted to take a step and look at this through how Sam emotionally moves through the story versus only seeing like this panel to this panel, this panel. We wanted to figure out the evolution of the character through the pages.
And just before we get into with me drawing the character now more full figured, I wanted to comment on how we decided upon 4 pages. It's really more or less a starting point. It could have been 3 pages, it could have been longer, could have been a single page. But I think we decided that the emotional beats of this character, what they were going through, 4 pages at that moment felt good. And
Hmm.
so when we were talking about it, just generally, it was more or less like we'll kind of see what happens as Sarah's figuring out the emotional beats as she was writing it down, and so she came to that 4 page conclusion. So it wasn't really anything we were like settled on. It was just more
Hmm.
like, hey, let's see how it feels as you're writing this down,
Hmm.
and then we got to that 4 page. And then the other thing I wanted to uh, make a comment about was that doing this the way that she did with those real emotional profiles for each page, that's not necessarily something that happens all the time. This is actually, I commented on that episode. That was new for me and I liked it. It was a really different way of approaching because it really gave me the idea of like, oh, so for page one, as you can see here, it's kind of normalcy.
Hmm.
Person's going through very everyday type of movements. And it gave me like a real focal point for what I wanted to do with that page one. And then that page two, you get to a bit bigger movement, right? And that was shown through their stance, how they move their arms, how their, hair is moving a bit. They're acting a little bit bigger, right? And that I think was very helpful for this kind of story because we know that this person is going from one state of mind into a completely different state of mind by the end of the story. And
Hmm.
that's called a character arc, but not every character is going to go through something like that in that way. So, because this is a shorter story, I think you doing that kind of emotional breakdown per page really worked. Now, let me ask you a question. If it was, let's say, a 30-page story, would you attempt it that way?
You know what? I think it actually kind of depends on the story because this one was so driven by this character's change in such a short period of time. We really needed to see it, how that was going to happen to get from start to finish. I probably definitely wouldn't do page by page, but probably would do something similar of what needs to happen at certain points in order to make that massive emotional switch. Because this character goes from sort of calm and reserved to prying open a door on their wall pretty quickly. So we had to figure out how that would happen in order to make it make sense.
Yeah. And one thing to think about too, when you're writing a story, the character may start off on a negative to a positive and then go back to a negative and then a positive. So throughout the story,
Mhm.
the character may be in a great place and then they go downhill and then they go up again, but then they go
Absolutely.
downhill again. So I think it just depends on how the character's arc flows throughout the story as to how you want to approach it. And as you can see here, the way I'm approaching it visually, it does go through such a kind of like a real small to large that
Mhm.
doing each page allowed for me to really get it gave me permission by page four to go like really big with that kind of emotional state. And that I think really informed how the pages would look, how I would break down panels, all of that kind of stuff, which you'll see coming up. And I'm taking notes here as we're talking uh, in that episode as we're talking and figuring out like, oh, the hair is going to be big here, and their clothing maybe become more disheveled,
Mhm.
and maybe we're talking about like color. Is there going to be more reds, angry colors in this page because of the emotional state they're going through? So these are all the things. It's okay. It's great to take notes as you're doing this because it hopefully gets you back to that place when you reread them, go, "That's what I was thinking when I was doing that."
For sure, and even just seeing, in this quick little condensed version from page 1 to page 4, there's massive changes in the way this character looks and acts. And that was really important
Mhm.
in this episode to really figure out because then that's going to drive every single beat of the story. When you just look at this character that came in, happily holding boxes to somebody who looks like this, we had to make a lot happen in such a short amount of time, which is, you know, an interesting exercise in and of itself, and these visuals really helped to capture what that was gonna be like. Let's recap episode 4. So this is what happened in episode 4. So this is when we actually started to really break down into panels, into pages, into a script. So what I did is I wrote the script out, page by page with panel breakdowns as well as dialogue. And this is where we decided to actually name the character Sam because we thought it was going to make it easier to give a name to this character. It's never said out loud anywhere. It's only just for us to know, but we decided to call the character Sam. We did panel by panel breakdowns. This is something that is, from my point of view, from an action point of view, not prescriptive in terms of what actually happens in each panel. And you'll see why that's important because they are going to shift. But essentially, we read through the entire breakdown of the script so that Keith could then begin the illustrations of how this was going to start to look very roughly as thumbnails, panel by panel.
Before we actually do that, we had the conversation where I wanted to slow down just a little bit here because
Mhm.
I still needed to know like how to block or stage this setting, right? So we
Exactly.
went through the script and I realized I have no idea where like everything in the room is. I
Mhm.
have no idea where the light is coming from. And until I figured that out, a lot of like the panel decisions couldn't happen. And so we decided to take the second part of that episode and go through, okay, here's the layout of the kitchen. Here's the layout of this apartment. Here's the kitchen. Here's where each uh, door is, where the light may be coming from, and some of the uh, playing off of some of the descriptions you gave me on each page with what
Mhm.
was happening per panel, I was like, "Okay, I need to make sure that there's, like, the TV is placed, opposite of where the door is so that when the person's looking in the TV, they can see the reflection of the door," right? So these are things this is a good idea to do if you're trying to map out visually where things are to do some kind of layout so that you can actually have an idea of how big your space is, where things are located, where you may have to plant something ahead of time, like the TV and looking at the TV and having the reflection of the door in the TV. If you don't actually have the TV in the right location early on, then you may have to go back and redraw it because you realize that the TV is actually a really important element, right? So all of that stuff is important in regards to figuring out before you get into a more finished part of the story.
And this is actually also when we made the decision that this wouldn't be set in current days, that this was going to be set in a previous decade because we thought it was important that that Sam didn't have access to immediate communications, like couldn't just go in a group chat and find people who have weird doors and stuff like that. So this was
Mhm.
also visually important too because as you saw earlier, the look of the television, the kind of phone, all that kind of thing plays in to setting us in the right time and space.
Yeah, and that previous page there where I was showing that there was like a pile of books. That's person going analog and researching like
Yes.
what this door is like. Did it exist before? In the layout of the apartment. So, um, a lot of these things aren't necessarily thought of ahead. They kind of come out as you're working on it, and then we talk about it and go, "Hey,
Mhm.
when could we do this setting? Does the '80s work for this? Is this a current setting? Like, how is that gonna affect the story?" And so it's you can have that ahead of time, but in the way we're working, we're just kind of, figuring it out as we go.
Yes, and sometimes things that you thought about in your head aren't always as implied as you thought they were. So having that conversation is incredibly helpful because then you do find things that weren't necessarily obvious but need to be obvious. So,
Mhm.
okay, let's head to our next episode. So this was 5 recap.
So I guess I'll start with this. So essentially, we've figured out where everything's going to be staged. So I can actually start really quickly breaking down what's going to happen in each page. You can call that panel breakdown, plotting, anything that really helps with getting the story uh, very quickly on a page that you can see everything happening. Right, that's really what it is. Is it's a blueprint for how the page is going to, or how the story is going to be laid out. And the whole point of doing these thumbnails, they're very quick, they're very messy. You may be the artist may be the only one at this point that really understands what's happening. It's just to get the immediate ideas down, to figure out how many panels you think it could be to make sure it will fit on a page. At this point, you may go, you know what? We may need to expand how many pages, and that's actually what we ended up doing. Is we decided that a 4 page story doesn't quite work. It could work, but there were things that were missing. So we added 2 more pages. And so I'll let Sarah continue
Mhm.
on from that point.
Absolutely. And what ended up happening is that we found that we wanted to give a bit more time, especially to the ending of the story, right? We wanted to really kind of play out how what happens that open that door, go through, because that was such a big part of it. We wanted to give that its own page and then have an entire page of the starting again, of the next person moving into the apartment with that feeling of this is a cycle, this is going to keep going. So this was sort of at the time that we decided when Keith started to draw them that we felt that we just needed those additional pages to really tell this full story in the way that we wanted to tell it. So that was sort of what was happening here is that we were expanding everything out into the 6 pages versus the 4. This was also the opportunity Keith had gone through and marked up the script. So added notes, added specific things. We started really looking at light sources, all that kind of stuff, just to ensure we were telling the proper story in the way we wanted to, and that the panels were doing the correct job. And we changed a lot of things. A lot of stuff that was in the original script ended up changing by the time we got to this point, and that's a good thing, right? It meant that we were working it
Yep.
hard. We were really thinking it through. We weren't just like, first idea, best idea. We were really playing with it to get to a point that we thought we were telling the best version of the story we could be.
And so some of the technical parts of this, you see that I wrote down establishing shot, action shot, and close up shot. So basically, with each page, I always try to leave those 3 types of panels on there. It's not 100%. You don't have to do it with every page, but an establishing shot is giving you the information you need, where we are, when we are, all that kind of stuff. That on a page, the action is giving the reader something, some kind of really doesn't have to be a huge movement. It could just be somebody opening up a book of some sort, but we're seeing their full body. We're seeing like the cameras pulled away enough so that we can see most of what they're doing. And then a close up shot is much more emotional, like when you're zooming into somebody and you can see their facial expressions. So you, as the reader, you're getting a sense of how the person what they're going through at that time. It could also be used as a way to show a detail, like a watch or something like that. And those shots can vary. You can have an establishing action type shot or an action close up where the person's doing some, punching, but we're seeing really only from their chest up. So you can have variations, but just generally you want to have those kinds of shots. So you're making sure you're giving information, you're giving some kind of excitement, you're showing emotional states, and then as you see there, I laid it out so you can actually see where the first page starts. And when you open up a comic book or a book, usually the first page you see is number 1, and then when you turn the page, it's 2 and 3, you turn the page 4, 5. So if there's any kind of scenario where you want to have, like a double page spread or like one big image going across 2 pages, you wanna make sure it's on those page breaks. And then finally, and Sarah can attest to this in a moment, at the end of each page, you wanna give some kind of like a cliffhanger. It doesn't have to be a super big
Mhm.
one, but it could be something that you just wanna, have it so that it makes you wanna turn the page.
Absolutely. Having those page turns are incredibly important, especially with this genre, right? Because we are going horror, psychological horror, suspense. You really don't want to have everything wrapped up nicely on each page. You always want to leave it with that moment of, well, I can't stop here, right? We want people to feel like they have to keep going to get to the end. And because it's a short story, that's obviously incredibly doable. And we really thought through all of those moments to ensure that we really kept that cadence of needing to turn the page.
Well, thank you for watching this again with us. Hopefully, this means that you're now completely caught up. Now, of course, I do recommend going back and watching every episode prior to this so that you get a really good sense of like what we were talking about here, a lot of the detail. And of course, we do go into a bit more if you go join our membership. So
Mhm.
some of what you were seeing in those recaps were actually part of what we show in the membership as well. So you get a bit of a hint of what you'd be getting in that part of it. And ultimately, as you can see here, this is an ever evolving story. So while we may try to tell you what's going to be happening next, we always leave room for the possibility that things may change. So if we've said one thing and then something's kind of changed a bit after the next episode, or after the you join us for the next episode, it's just again because we're trying to like um, make this as good a story as possible, so that you're really able to get the best out of learning about this.
Exactly. And, like Keith mentioned, we are literally creating in real time in front of you. And creating is messy. It goes back and forth. You change things, you change your mind, and that's a good thing. So thank
Yes.
you for letting us do that live before your eyes. Thank you.
Bye bye.